still haven't dried up in them. They'll bloom in just a few days, 2 weeks at the most. Glads take 8 weeks. So hopefully I can get some of those glad bulbs in the ground. And the first that I got in before the big rains have the buds up and they're ready to bloom. So maybe we'll have some next Sunday, I hope.
It's a continual process.
Well, and dumb me, the flowers that I really like are the ones that you have to plant the bulbs in the spring and dig them in the fall. If they don't take a lot of work, they're not nice flowers. I don't know why that is. But no, I use a lot of zinnias too. But even the zinnias I planted late, and then they got too wet, or too dry first, and then they're too wet. I do have some out there about ready to bloom, but it's going to be a while.
It's a year-long process.
Yeah. Yeah. Luckily, Mark and the kids came and helped dig a bunch of the bulbs last fall. So I've got a bunch yet to plant, but I probably won't get them all in. It's too late.
Someone that didn't know any better would ask you why you keep doing it. So why did you keep doing it?
So you can see the flowers on Sunday. People like it. I like doing it. Saturday evening's highlight is fixing an arrangement of flowers for Sunday.
So how did that come about? How did that, because you were doing this before I got here, and I've been here 25 years, so how did you get started?
My goodness.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
How did you get started doing flowers for the altar?
Well, I think shortly after we moved back here, Carol was worship chairman. And so she needed flowers for the altar, and so I started fixing them. And it's just kind of evolved since then. I just keep doing it.
Now, I understand talking to Doug that you've had relatives that have done this before in your family for the church?
You got my note from in the mail yesterday or the day before, right?
No.
No?
No.
Well, you know, you put out this thing for 50-year members. Yeah, I had an aunt that always fixed flowers for church. Aunt Bernice McCutcheon. And so when Carol needed flowers and I liked fixing them, we just kept doing it.
Can you tell us a little more about Bernice? Or is it Bernice or Bernice?
Whichever you want.
Okay,
And
tell us
we
more.
called her Aunt Bernice
Tell us a little bit about her. What was her last name again?
McCutcheon.
Okay.
She was my mother's oldest sister, an old maid school teacher. She taught math at Boise High School, and stayed with my grandparents and took care of them. And she died of cancer. She was about 59 years old, I think. So she and my mother were very close. They were very close. There were six kids in that family, and 3 boys and 3 girls, and the one girl lived at Rochester, Indiana. So Mom and Aunt Bernice were very close.
And she was a member at Bluegrass, right?
Yes, oh yes.
How long had she been a member there?
My mother or Aunt Bernice?
Aunt Bernice.
All her life. All her life. She was born about 1901, I believe. And always at Bluegrass. Grandpa's family was all grown at Bluegrass. And I was telling Doug some time ago, when you go in the cemetery, You know, there's a curve to the right, to the left as you go up the hill. That was not always part of the cemetery because all there was a path that went straight up to the old church, the log church, the original church. And they wanted to make this curve around and drive around. And so Grandpa gave them $900 to buy that ground. And he got for that 18 lots. And I'm using the 18th one. All of his 6 kids are there, which is unusual for a family to all be buried the same place in this day and age.
Now, there's a lot of familiar names in your family that we're familiar with in the history of bluegrass. Can you remind us of some of those names, last names?
Well, of course, the Riggses were there too. They were raised on Ruston Lane, you know, where you go through Ruston Lane, there's a great big house on the north side of the road. That was my great-grandpa. He came from Ireland and built that house. And surprisingly, it's still there. I'd love to go through it. I'm going to have to stop there someday and say, show me this house. But anyway, the Riggses, well, the McCutcheons too, they all scattered around. And they were all intermarried till everybody's related to everybody. For example, Roxana Koenig was a first cousin to my mother and my father both. My mother and father weren't related, but Roxana's mother was a sister to my grandpa McCutcheon, and her dad was a brother to my grandpa Riggs.
And you had some connection with some of the other names. I know we've talked about.
Wheelers, Grandpa's oldest sister, Aunt Roxy, married into the Wheelers, so there they came. Were Rustons. My grandmother McCutcheon was a Ruston. Other members of, well, Grandma McCutcheon's brother and her 2 cousins were all raised by the same man because brothers married sisters and one man died, so the other man raised both families, took care of both farms. And so Molly McCutcheon, which is Uncle Harrison's wife, was a cousin of hers, and Richard Riggs's, Uncle Dick Riggs's wife, Aunt Nettie, was a sister to her, and she was a Ruston.
And so just about every name in the community, your family tree would include at some point somewhere.
Related to all of them, yeah.
Yeah.
What were some of those names, those last names?
Besides the Ruston and McCutcheon and Riggs and Wheelers and I'm lost to think some of those names were.
Bond, of course, you're.
Oh, that was a McCutcheon. George
Right.
Bond McCutcheon
Mm-hmm.
was my great-grandpa.
And then do you have Wallace
Wallace's, see, that came in through the Wheelers.
and Hilliard?
Yeah. Hilliard, how were they related? That was a different family. I don't know that they were very much interrelated with ours.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's talk about the flowers just a little bit more. I know we're hopping around here, but tell us that process. You talked a little bit more about planting the bulbs and rotating bulbs and all that stuff. Tell us a little bit more about that. Because some of us are city kids like me.
When Carol and I got married, this Christmas after that, we gave her grandmother an amaryllis bulb like you see in the store at Christmas time. It's one little bulb in a pot and you grow it and it blooms. And she had that thing blooming for 3 or 4 years without repotting it. And then finally it quit blooming. It just got smaller and smaller. And when she died, I said, I want that bulb. I'm going to figure out how to grow those things. And so I have given away buckets full of bulbs, and I have planted about 5 buckets full here each year, and maybe added a few for other varieties, but mainly they're that old red amaryllis.
What year would that have been when you got that?
1967.
And are these red ones up here, are these amaryllis? Okay.
Yeah. And
So-
it's just a matter of planting them outside every spring and giving them all summer to grow and keep the weeds away and dig the bulbs in the fall. So they would freeze if you left them out there, so you got to get them in.
And so you mentioned your design skills, where you got your design skills.
What design skills?
Flower arrangements.
I don't.
That's his point, though.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I walked all over you.
I don't know. I just do what I think looks good. If you don't like it, that's tough.
Nobody ever complains, do they?
No, they don't. They've been very complimentary. And I don't know that I have any special skills at it. I just do what I think looks good. In fact, those from Sunday, you see the white in there, those are weeds out along the road. We find what something that you like, use it. It doesn't matter if it's a weed or a flower or what. Those like that, my Aunt Bernice fixed a wedding for my cousin up at Linden, Indiana. And that was her flower. She had those white flowers from along the roadside and ivy. Did her whole wedding in that years and years and years ago.
Now, there's some of those they say now are they like an offshoot of hemlock or something like that. I read an article in the paper about some of those are what would you call those white flowers?
Queen Anne's lace.
Yeah, I read an article. There's something that looks a lot like Queen Anne's lace, but it's poisonous, and so.
I hope they're not.
Well, just don't eat them, I guess. Right?
No.
Well, we may take that outside here just a little bit, just 'cause out in the sunlight. I want to because that's talking about all those different flowers. That would be one good to talk about as far as an arrangement goes. But
Some of it's starting to droop now.
yeah, those little black-eyed Susans are looking sad.
Yeah.
That's all right. That's all right.
And the Queen Anne's lace, I have to pick them the night before and I put them in Sunday morning. Because they need to sit in water, and some of them come to and look good and some don't. So I only use the ones that perk up and look good after I bring them in.
So you said you start on Saturday night picking and
Yeah.
putting things together. Walk us through that process.
Well, usually about 5 o'clock, 4 or 5 o'clock Saturday night, I soak the oasis in whichever flower pot I want to use, and get the greenery in it, and the amaryllis or whatever big flowers. I like to have glads. I'll be so happy when the glads start blooming. And get the big ones in, and then you can always fill in a little bit on Sunday if you need to, Sunday morning. And then luckily we've got a good neighbor that picks it up and takes it to church for us.
Perfect. All right, let's talk a little bit more about your family and all your connections. You are related to Arad McCutcheon, is that what I understand?
He was my mother's youngest brother. Yes.
What stories do you have about him?
Well, he was just a good uncle, and he lived at Santa Claus on the lake. And his birthday was on July the 4th, so we always had July the 4th at Uncle Arad's. for his birthday. And the last year he was there, I noticed his eye was starting to droop like mine does. And I went to him, just going to ask him if he knew anything about what was causing that. And about that time, Aunt Virginia says, "Let's eat." So I never did get to ask him. But I'm sure he had mitochondrial myopathy, just like I do. It's a genetic disease, passed down. Grandpa had it. 4 of the 6 kids of his I can identify now had it. And they've only known about this disease for the last 40 years. But that's how rapidly genetic diseases are becoming well known.
So did he ever recruit you to play basketball?
No, we were baling hay. We had farm chores to do. Now, he had farm chores to do as a kid too, so every time they would butcher pigs for meat, then they would save the bladder. And he blew that up, and that was his first basketball. That's how he learned to play basketball, with a pig's bladder.
It's a great story.
Oh, wow.
That's fantastic. I started at U of E taking night classes before I graduated high school. Had to get my math grades up before they would accept me. And so I took, and it would have been in '82, in the spring of '82, I took college algebra from A.Rad McCutcheon.
Really?
Yeah. I think that was like maybe the last year or next to last year that he taught.
He always wanted to stay in the teaching field, even while he was coaching. He was still a teacher.
And so he would have played basketball at our community house.
Yes, oh
He-
yeah.
And so he really learned the game at the Bluegrass Community House.
The Reverend Shake, yes.
Yeah. What do you know any stories about Reverend Shake in that whole period of time?
Well, he was sent here supposedly to get the youth involved. And he did. And that's why he had all these. Well, my mother played basketball. They had girls basketball and boys basketball back in that day. And he was very well liked, respected preacher. And maybe he got into more activities with the kids and with the people than some ministers in that age did. But
Yeah, that seemed like a dynamic part of our history was about the 9 years or whatever, 1920 to 29, that he was here. Fortunately, we have some record of that, newspaper articles and such about that. Yeah, that was, and of course the community house was built during that time, and so I appreciate knowing that. I mean, how unique that your mother played probably on one of the first girls' basketball teams.
yeah. And he not only improved bluegrass community, he got the whole county involved, and that's when the fair started and so forth. All started at bluegrass in the community house. So he was very dynamic in getting people involved in things.
Yeah.
Wish I had known him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because everything you ever heard by saying anything about Reverend Shake, it was always positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kind of like Doug Hyman.
We can edit that out.
Well, I'm going to. So it's fair to say you've seen quite a bit change at Bluegrass over the years, right?
Yeah, 3 churches, yeah.
What do you think about all
I think it's fantastic. It almost scares me. How can we afford all of that? But apparently there's enough people coming and giving to do it. And that's great. Of course, my aunt Alta was on the building committee for the old church. And I'm sure Grandpa was quite involved in building the white church on the corner, the second church. And of course, that's where I remember growing up in Sunday school. I was in the white church.
Have you thought about what you'd hope to see in the future at Bluegrass?
Not really. I don't worry about that. It's doing good. It's going to be okay. There's one thing I wish had happened that didn't. I wish they had built the new church up beside the cemetery to the west. I just would like to have seen it up on that hill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe the fifth one, huh?
Have to widen the road a little bit, probably.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well,
Return to our original stomping grounds, right?
well, Doc Ritchie's house, where his house was up there,
Mm-hmm.
that would have been a nice place for a church. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you think your ancestors, all the folks in your family tree, what do you think they would be saying about the church today?
oh, I think they'd be very happy to see it blooming like it is. I guess one thing that does bother me, though, I look around and I think, where's this one? Where's that one? Where'd they go? Why? Seems like Bluegrass is such a draw. I don't know why anyone would leave and go somewhere else, but they do.
Mm-hmm.
But we still keep growing. So.
Very good. It's funny that you said it bloomed. It's blooming.
I love that. I love that. Are you good?
Mm-hmm.
I'm good. That Reverend Shake, I wanted to follow up on that. That may be something too for the November one, information for that if we don't use it in this particular segment. That's why I thought we'd go ahead and take advantage while we were interviewing to see what you knew about, because I know that's one really hot period of our history during that time that we want to highlight in November when we kind of talk about our ministry and programming aspect of the church. And that's part of the history, well-known history at that point. So
Because it branched out and got other segments of the community involved in the church.
it's really when it became a community church. I mean, community house, I mean, it was focused on the community, and wow, the number of people that came through the community house that I've heard and met through the years since I've been here is just incredible, that Bluegrass was known for that community outreach.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the people's name where the church, that owned the ground where the church is now. The new church is.
Well,
Floyd bought that farm. They had no children. And there was my Uncle John Riggs was across the road on the south side. They had no children either. And Danny Grimm bought that. And I understand when he tore that house down, they found money in the walls. Be interesting to know. I have never asked Danny about that.
So,
She was a yokel. That's another name. See, now that comes from the Kratzville area more, the yokels. Oh, what was those people's name that lived on the corner there? They didn't have any other family here.
it was before Floyd bought that
Yes.
ground.
After they passed away, he got that. It'll come to me. They were very active in the church. And of course, in fair times when they were setting up fairs, whichever one, Uncle John or these people, whoever had an empty field, that's where they had the fair. Across from the community house. And they had all the 4-H projects and women's exhibits in the community house. The livestock would be out in those fields, in tents.
It's too bad there's not too many pictures from that time period. It'd be fun to see that set up like that.
But see, when I was in 4-H, it was at Scott School. And I have vivid memories of those tents all scattered around. Horses were always out there by the road. And there was a little fenced-in area in the middle where we showed. And they had concerts or whatever, entertainment.
Were there rides back then? Ferris wheel and that kind of thing?
No. Well, not much, no. They were opposed to that. In fact, not too many years ago, that there was some discussion when they started having rides at the fair. It was not really a good idea. But it has grown. And a lot of people, that's all they come for. But no, it was an agricultural fair, not a Ferris ride. Yeah. And see, the ground where the fairgrounds is now belonged to my grandpa Riggs. And where the airport is now belonged to my grandpa Riggs. And when my mom and dad got married, they took over the farm at the airport. And of course the war was going on. And Grandpa died in 41. And the government said, you better get out of here or the planes are going to take the roof off your house. So that's when we bought this, 1941. And Grandpa also had that ground where the fair is. And his oldest son, Uncle Ralph, who married a Newmaster, there's another family name. Newmasters are all related to Uncle Ralph's family. Anyway, that was such a poor farm, he couldn't make a living at it. He went to work for the Stringtown Lumber Company. Always worked at Stringtown. But Grandpa had those 2 farms, and after he died, Grandma sold both of them then to the government. One for the airport and one for the ammunition depot.
That's what the fairgrounds was, the ammunition depot.
Yeah, it was, yes, to store and manufacture ammunition. And that's what those buildings, the concrete blocks back in the back, they all had dirt stacked up high enough that if one of them would blow, it wouldn't catch another one. They were all separated by dirt piles.
I'm reading a book right now about the space race and how all of that rocket manufacturing went to Huntsville, Alabama. And it was interesting because all of the United States rocket technology came from the Germans. There was Germans that were,
Makes sense.
they had the first ballistic missiles that would go from Germany to England. And so the people that were in charge of that, towards the end of the war, they realized that they were going to lose. And so they amongst themselves, 40 or 50 engineers, all aerospace engineers, who should we surrender to? And should we surrender to the Americans or to the Russians? And they didn't want to go back to a totalitarian lifestyle, so they all surrendered to the Americans. And there was a munitions base in Huntsville, and they decided to put that process in Huntsville. And the people in Huntsville didn't like it because all these Germans came in. We just defeated the Germans, and now we're feeding them. They didn't like it a bit. And so I thought, with the German heritage here, what would have changed in Evansville if that rocket technology had come here?
Yeah.
Because we already, are well recognized for manufacturing and technology. And I was talking to a professor at U of E the other day about that, and we just both kind of chuckled about how this Evansville will be so much different if all that rocket technology had come here and missed it by that much.
Wow.
Well, in that ammunition depot there, nothing actually went to the war from there. The war got over right at that time. But
Fascinating time period.
that ground is in so much better use now with fairgrounds, and it's just too bad that it's always financially hard to keep it going.